Sarah nodded slowly, then surprised me by pulling me into a tight hug. They're idiots, Mom. Complete idiots for not seeing how amazing you are. For the first time since Rebecca's comment at the birthday party, I felt tears pressing behind my eyes, not from shame or humiliation, but from the simple relief of being seen, being valued, by someone who mattered to me. Thank you, I whispered against her hair. Now tell me about your rotation. Any interesting cases? We talked for hours, longer, and more openly than we had in years. I'd always kept a certain distance, trying to be the strong mother who never burdened her children with her problems. But that night, something shifted between us. Sarah stayed over, sleeping in her old room, and in the morning, she made coffee and hugged me before leaving for the hospital. Call me after your lawyer appointment, she instructed. I want to know everything. I will, I promised, and meant it. Patricia Manning's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, her practice occupying the entire second floor. The waiting room was elegant but comfortable, with actual cloth towels in the bathroom instead of paper and a selection of current magazines that didn't all focus on youth and beauty. Patricia herself was a revelation. A woman in her early 60s with a sleek silver bob, impeccable tailoring, and the confident demeanor of someone who had stopped caring what others thought of her appearance long ago. She listened intently as I laid out my case, occasionally making notes, her expression giving nothing away. When I finished, she sat back and regarded me thoughtfully. You've done an impressive amount of groundwork, Diane. Most people come to me much earlier in the process, with far less documentation. I've spent my career being thorough, I said. It seemed foolish to stop now. A small smile touched her lips. Indeed, well, based on what you've shown me, you have a strong case for age discrimination. The pattern is clear. Your performance reviews contradict their stated reasons for termination, and you have specific instances of age-based comments from management. So you'll take the case. I will. She leaned forward slightly. But you need to understand what you're getting into. These cases are rarely quick or easy. Meridian will fight back hard. They'll try to paint you as bitter, as underperforming, as difficult. They may offer a slightly better severance package to make you go away. The process could take months or even years. I nodded, having expected as much from my research. I understand, and you should know that about 60% of these cases settle before trial, usually with a non-disclosure agreement that prevents you from discussing the discrimination or the settlement. You might win financially but lose your ability to speak publicly about what happened. And if we don't settle, if we go to trial, Patricia's expression turned grimmer. Then you need to prepare for a brutal process. Corporate defense attorneys aren't known for their gentleness. They'll go through your entire work history looking for any mistake, any conflict, any moment of weakness they can use against you. I've been preparing for a brutal process my entire life, I said quietly. I'm a woman who has aged in public. I've been managing other people's discomfort with that reality for years. Something shifted in Patricia's expression, a recognition, perhaps, or a softening. Yes, I suppose you have. She straightened her papers. In that case, let's discuss strategy. We spent the next hour outlining our approach, filing an EEOC complaint, gathering additional evidence, preparing for Meridian's likely arguments. When our time was up, Patricia walked me to the door. One more thing, she said. These cases take a toll, emotionally and psychologically. Do you have a support system? The question caught me off guard. Did I? I had friends, certainly, but mostly work friends, who might now feel awkward about maintaining contact. I had my children, but I'd spent decades being their support, not the other way around. I'm working on that, I said finally. Patricia nodded, understanding in her eyes. I recommend you do. You'll need it. She handed me her card. Call my cell if anything comes up before our next meeting, and Diane. Document everything from now on. Every call, every email, every interaction with Meridian. This is no longer just your life. It's our case. As I drove home, I felt a strange mixture of determination and terror. I was really doing this, taking on a multinational corporation, putting myself in the public eye as a woman claiming age discrimination, opening myself to scrutiny, judgment, criticism, but also standing up, speaking out, refusing to disappear quietly as expected. My phone rang through the car speakers. Michael calling for the third time in 2 days. I took a deep breath and answered. Mom, finally, what's going on, Sarah? Said you lost your job. I winced at his tone, concern mixed with disbelief, as if the very idea of his competent mother being fired was inconceivable. Yes, I did, yesterday, but how? Why? You've been there forever. That's part of the problem, apparently. They wanted someone younger. They said that. His shock was palpable. Not in those exact words. They're not that stupid, but effectively, yes, that's ridiculous. You single quotes, old. I supplied a touch of wryness entering my voice. No, that's not what I meant. You're experienced. You're at the top of your game. You just got that award last year. Thank you for the vote of confidence. Unfortunately, David Chen disagreed. So what happens now? Will you get another job? Eventually, perhaps. But first, I'm filing an age discrimination lawsuit against Meridian. Silence filled the car for a long moment. A lawsuit? Mom, are you sure about this? Those can drag on forever. And what about finding another job? Won't this make other companies hesitant to hire you? Possibly, I admitted. But I'm not sure I want to jump right into another corporate position, where the same thing could happen all over again. So what? You're just going to what? Retire? There was an edge to his voice now. No, Michael, I'm going to fight for what's right. I'm going to stand up for myself and for every other woman who's been pushed aside because she had the audacity to age. Another silence. Then, have you talked to Dad about this? The question hit me like a slap. Martin. Of course Michael would think of him at a moment like this. No, why would I? He knows people. He might be able to help you get another position somewhere. Without the whole lawsuit thing. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Michael, your father left me for a woman half my age because I was letting myself go. Do you really think he's the person I should turn to right now? I just thought I know what you thought. You thought your father, with all his connections and privilege and maleness, could fix this for me. Could make it go away so you wouldn't have to think about your mother being discriminated against or fighting back. That's not fair. No, it's not fair. None of this is fair. But it's happening, and I'm dealing with it my way. I took a deep breath, trying to modulate my tone. I appreciate your concern. I really do. But I need your support right now, not your skepticism. Of course I support you, he said, but I could hear the reservation in his voice. I just don't want to see you get hurt. These big companies have teams of lawyers. I have a very good lawyer of my own, and I have evidence. I signaled for my exit. I'm almost home. Can we talk more later? I'm a bit drained from my legal consultation. Sure, Mom. A pause. Are you coming to dinner on Sunday? Rebecca's making her special lasagna. Rebecca. The thought of facing her smug perfection, her casual cruelty, made my stomach clench. But refusing would only validate whatever she was already saying about me behind my back. I'll be there, I said, looking forward to it. After we hung up, I sat in my parked car for several minutes, processing the conversation. Michael's first instinct had been to call his father, to find a way to smooth this over, to get me to fall back in line. He wasn't a bad person, he was just a product of the same system that had deemed me disposable. That Sunday, I arrived at Michael and Rebecca's house precisely on time, dressed in a midnight blue dress I'd ordered online for $212 after hours of searching for something age-appropriate yet not matronly. I'd spent $65 on a blowout and another $40 on a makeup session at Sephora, all to walk into the home of a woman who had compared me to a grandmother. To smile and make small talk and pretend her words hadn't altered something fundamental in me. Diane? You look nice. Rebecca's greeting held the faintest emphasis on nice, as if surprised I could achieve even that modest standard. She air-kissed near my cheek, her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming. Thank you, Rebecca. Something smells wonderful. I handed her the bottle of wine I'd brought, a Cabernet that had cost $47. Chosen carefully to be impressive but not ostentatious. Oh, we're actually having white with the lasagna. But I'm sure someone will enjoy this. She set the bottle aside without a second glance. Michael's in the living room. With his father. His father. Martin was here. Of course he was. I should have anticipated this. I walked into the living room to find my ex-husband in animated conversation with our son. At 62, Martin still cut an imposing figure, silver temples giving him a distinguished air, his expensive suit highlighting his gym-maintained physique. The woman beside him was not, as I'd expected, his young assistant turned second wife, but someone newer, even younger, perhaps 30, with the gleaming confidence of a woman who had never questioned her place in the world. Diane. Martin stood, his expression a practiced blend of cordiality and distance. Good to see you. You remember Stephanie? I did not remember Stephanie, because I had never met Stephanie, because Martin was now apparently on wife number 3, or girlfriend number who knows what. But I smiled and extended my hand. Of course. Lovely to see you again. Stephanie's handshake was firm, her smile professionally bright. You too. Michael talks about you all the time. I doubted that very much, but I nodded appreciatively and turned to greet my son. Michael hugged me a bit too enthusiastically, his relief at my social compliance palpable. Mom, you look great. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said, lowering my voice slightly. Though you might have mentioned your father would be here. Michael had the grace to look slightly abashed. It was a last-minute thing. Dad had some business contacts he thought might be helpful for you. Of course he did. I smiled tightly and took the seat farthest from Martin. How thoughtful. The next hour was excruciating, making small talk while avoiding any mention of my sudden unemployment, watching Martin hold court with stories of his business successes, observing the seamless way Rebecca and Stephanie fell into a conversation about fitness routines and skincare brands. Stephanie's a brand ambassador for Cell Renew, Rebecca explained, touching the younger woman's perfect arm. That's how she and Martin met, at a product launch party. How fascinating, I murmured, taking a sip of the white wine I didn't particularly enjoy. What exactly does Cell Renew do? It's a revolutionary anti-aging system, Stephanie enthused, clinically proven to reduce the appearance of fine lines by up to 73% in just 2 weeks. Is that so? I kept my expression pleasantly interested, though something was burning in the pit of my stomach. Anti-aging, as if aging were a disease to be cured, rather than a natural process to be experienced. You should try it, Diane, Rebecca said with synthetic solicitude. I'd be happy to get you Stephanie's friends and family discount. I felt every eye in the room on me, waiting for my reaction. The old Diane would have smiled gratefully, would have murmured something self-deprecating about certainly needing all the help I could get. The new Diane, the one who had emerged in the past 5 days, felt something different rising within her. What an interesting suggestion, I said, my voice light but clear. What exactly about my appearance made you think I needed an anti-aging system, Rebecca? The room went utterly silent. Rebecca's perfect features froze in momentary confusion. I just thought. I mean, everyone can benefit from good skincare. Everyone, including you and Stephanie. You both appear to be using quite a bit of assistance already. I sipped my wine again, maintaining eye contact. Michael coughed uncomfortably. Mom, it was just a suggestion, Rebecca said, her voice tightening. No need to get defensive. Not defensive at all. Just curious about the assumption behind the offer. I smiled. But you're right, good skincare is important at any age, as is good nutrition. regular exercise, and not treating other women like they have an expiration date stamped on their foreheads. Martin cleared his throat. Diane, I heard about Meridian. Tough break. If you'd like, I can put you in touch with some people at Jensen Pharmaceuticals. They might have something suitable for someone with your experience. Suitable. The word hung in the air. Suitable for someone like you. Someone old, someone past her prime. I looked at Martin, really looked at him, and saw for the first time how much he'd aged himself. The expensive tailoring and carefully maintained physique couldn't hide the sagging skin at his jawline, the deep lines bracketing his mouth. The difference was, his aging gave him character. It made him distinguished. It increased his value, rather than diminishing it. Thank you, Martin, but I'm pursuing other options at the moment. I turned to Michael. I've filed an age discrimination complaint against Meridian. Martin's eyebrows shot up. You're suing them. Diane, is that wise? I believe the more relevant question is whether what they did was legal. I kept my voice even, and based on my attorney's assessment, it wasn't. These cases are very difficult to prove, Martin said, slipping effortlessly into his explaining voice. And the process can be brutal. Corporations have deep pockets for legal defense. I'm aware of the challenges. I've done my research. Martin exchanged a glance with Michael. I'm sure you have. But sometimes it's better to move forward rather than getting caught up in battles you can't win. Can't win, I repeated. Or shouldn't fight. Because those are very different things, Martin. Stephanie looked uncomfortable, clearly not having signed up for this level of family tension. The lasagna smells ready. Should we check on it? Rebecca seized the escape route gratefully, and the two younger women disappeared into the kitchen. Martin leaned forward once they were gone. Look, Diane, I understand you're upset. Being let go is a blow to anyone's ego, especially after so many years. But creating a public spectacle won't help you professionally. I'm not creating a spectacle. I'm holding a company accountable for illegal discrimination. You're making yourself unemployable, he countered bluntly. No one wants to hire someone with a litigious reputation. Maybe I don't want to be hired by anyone who views standing up against discrimination as litigious. Michael interjected, his voice placating. Dad's just concerned about your future. Mom, we both are. I looked between them, my ex-husband and my son. So similar in their expressions of masculine concern, their assumption that they knew better than I did what was good for me. My future is not something either of you gets to decide, I said quietly. I appreciate the concern, but this is my fight. Dinner's ready. Rebecca's voice called from the dining room, artificially bright. The meal that followed was a masterclass in strained civility. We discussed the weather, Michael's job, an upcoming local election, anything but the elephant in the room. I complimented Rebecca's lasagna, which was indeed excellent. I asked appropriate questions about Stephanie's brand ambassadorship. I was, in short, the perfect dinner guest, pleasant, engaged, unremarkable. But something had shifted irrevocably, and we all knew it. I was no longer playing by the rules that had governed my behavior for decades. I was no longer prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own dignity. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like a small earthquake that rearranges familiar landmarks just enough to make the landscape suddenly strange. As I prepared to leave, Martin followed me to the door while the others cleared the table. Diane, let me give you some friendly advice. As someone who still cares about your well-being. I turned to face him. Go ahead. Take whatever settlement they offer. Sign the NDA. Move on with your life. Fighting this will only make things harder for you and for Michael. For Michael, how exactly does my standing up for myself make things harder for our adult son? Martin lowered his voice. You know Rebecca's father is on the board of directors at Meridian's parent company, right? This lawsuit puts Michael in a very awkward position. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Rebecca's father is Gordon Williams. The Gordon Williams who chairs Perennial Healthcare's board. Yes, I assumed you knew. I hadn't known. Somehow, In all the family gatherings and conversations over the 3 years Michael and Rebecca had been married, this crucial detail had never been mentioned. Gordon Williams, whose reputation for ruthless corporate maneuvering was legendary in the pharmaceutical industry. Gordon Williams, who had been pushing for younger, more dynamic leadership across all perennial subsidiaries, according to industry gossip. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. David Chen's sudden appearance at Meridian. The systematic targeting of older employees. My own abrupt dismissal, despite excellent performance reviews. This hadn't been random corporate ageism. This had been personal, or at least, familial. Did Michael know? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. When I told him about the lawsuit, did he know his father-in-law was ultimately responsible for what happened to me? Martin hesitated just long enough to answer my question. You should talk to Michael about this. I intend to. I reached for the door handle. Thank you for the illuminating conversation, Martin. It's been very, clarifying. Diane, good night. I drove home in a state of cold fury, my mind racing. How long had Michael known? Had he been at dinner tables where my job, my future, had been casually discussed and disposed of? Had Rebecca known when she made her cutting comment about me looking like a grandmother? Had that been a deliberate wounding, knowing I was about to lose the career I'd built over nearly 2 decades? By the time I reached my condo, I had left 3 voicemails for Michael, each more demanding than the last. I paced my living room, unable to sit still, vibrating with a rage that felt almost purifying in its intensity. When my phone finally rang at 10:24 p.m., I answered before the first ring completed. Did you know? I demanded without preamble. Michael's sigh came through clearly. Mom answered the question. Michael, did you know your father-in-law was behind what happened at Meridian? A long pause. Not exactly. Not the details. What does that mean? Either you knew or you didn't. Rebecca mentioned something a few months ago about her dad wanting to restructure some of the companies under Perennial. She said he was frustrated with the slow pace of innovation, the resistance to change from the old guard. He stumbled slightly over the euphemism. I didn't connect it to you specifically. You didn't think to warn me. To give me some hint that my job might be in jeopardy. I didn't know it would affect you directly. And by the time I realized, it was already happening. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be honest with me. My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. You were supposed to tell me that your wife's father was orchestrating a purge of older employees across his companies. You were supposed to be on my side. I am on your side, he protested, but it's complicated. Rebecca's my wife, her family is important to her, and I'm your mother. Or does that count for less now? That's not fair. You're putting me in an impossible position. No, Michael, you put yourself there when you chose not to tell me the truth. When you sat across from me tonight and watched your father try to manipulate me into dropping my lawsuit, knowing exactly why. He's just trying to protect you. He is trying to protect Gordon Williams and, by extension, Rebecca's family money. Let's not pretend this is about my well-being. Michael fell silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. What are you going to do? I'm going to continue with my lawsuit, and now I'm going to add Gordon Williams personally to my documentation of the systematic age discrimination at Meridian and all Perennial companies. Mom, please think about this. Going after someone like Gordon Williams, I'm not going after anyone. I'm holding accountable the people responsible for illegal discrimination. The fact that one of them happens to be your father-in-law doesn't change that. This will destroy my marriage. His voice cracked slightly, the raw pain in his voice pierced through my anger, reminding me that for all his adult appearance, this was still my child, caught between loyalties. I took a deep breath. Michael, listen to me. If your marriage is destroyed by me standing up against illegal discrimination, then it wasn't much of a marriage to begin with. If Rebecca loves you, she'll understand that you can't control my actions any more than she can control her father's. And if she doesn't understand that, then she doesn't really love you for who you are. It's not that simple. No, it never is. But what is simple is this: I will not be bullied, manipulated, or guilted into accepting injustice. Not by Meridian, not by Martin, not by Gordon Williams, and not by you. The silence that followed was heavy with all the things we weren't saying: his fear, my hurt, the shifting landscape of our relationship. I love you, Michael, I said finally. That will never change. But I need to do this. Not just for me, but for every other woman being pushed aside because she had the audacity to age. I understand, he said, though I wasn't sure he did. I just ... I need some time to figure this out. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room for a long while, processing everything that had happened. The revelation about Gordon Williams changed the complexion of my case significantly. It wasn't just corporate ageism, it was a deliberate, top-down strategy being implemented across multiple companies, and I had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the pharmaceutical industry, who also happened to be my son's father-in-law. The sensible thing would be to back down, to take whatever settlement Meridian offered, to preserve family peace, to protect Michael's marriage, to avoid making an enemy of someone with Gordon Williams' resources and influence. But I was done being sensible if it meant being complicit in my own erasure. The next morning, I called Patricia Manning and told her about the Gordon Williams connection. Her sharp intake of breath was audible over the phone. This changes things, she said. Williams has a history of aggressive litigation. Does it weaken our case? On the contrary, it potentially strengthens it. If we can prove this is a systematic pattern across multiple perennial subsidiaries, with Williams as the common factor, ... double quotes, she paused. But it also raises the stakes considerably. Williams will fight this tooth and nail. The pressure on you will be intense. I understand. They'll dig into every aspect of your life, every performance review, every workplace conflict, every personal relationship that might be leveraged against you. Let them dig. I have nothing to hide. Everyone has something to hide, Diane. Or at least something they'd prefer not to have exposed to public scrutiny. Her voice softened slightly. I'm not trying to discourage you. I just want you to be prepared for what's coming. I appreciate that. But I'm not backing down. Good. The approval in her voice was unmistakable. In that case, I'll start investigating the pattern across other perennial companies. If you have any contacts at sister organizations who might be willing to talk, ... double quotes, I'll make some calls, I promised. Over the next few weeks, my life took on a new rhythm. Each morning, I worked on building our case, reaching out to former colleagues, documenting every interaction, researching similar cases. In the afternoons, I began tentatively exploring what a post-Meridian life might look like. I enrolled in a digital marketing certificate program to update my skills. I joined a women's networking group specifically for professionals. Over 45, I started a private blog documenting my experiences, not for publication but as a form of processing. Michael remained distant, our conversations brief and careful. Rebecca had apparently been furious when she learned about the lawsuit, and while Michael hadn't explicitly taken her side, his withdrawal spoke volumes. It hurt, but I understood. He was trying to navigate an impossible situation, and I had appended the careful balance he'd maintained between his family of origin and his marriage. Sarah, however, became my unexpected rock. She called daily, listened without judgment, offered practical suggestions, and never once suggested I should back down to make everyone else more comfortable. She even connected me with several of her medical school professors who had experienced similar discrimination in their careers. Do you think I'm being selfish? I asked her one evening, voicing the doubt that occasionally still plagued me. Putting my principles above family peace. I think you're finally being as selfish as men have always been allowed to be, she replied without hesitation. And I think it's about damn time. 3 months into the process, our case was building momentum. Patricia had found 4 other Former Meridian employees over 50 who had been restructured out in the past year, all with excellent performance reviews. More significantly, she had uncovered a similar pattern at 2 other perennial subsidiaries. The EEOC had formally taken up our complaint and was conducting its own investigation, and then the counterattack began. It started with a phone call from an unknown number on a Tuesday afternoon. "Is this Diane Reynolds?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, it is." "Who's calling?" "My name is Kara Winters, from the Business Chronicle. I'm working on a story about age discrimination claims against perennial healthcare companies. I understand you're the lead plaintiff in a case against Meridian Pharmaceuticals." My pulse quickened. I hadn't spoken to any press. "I have no comment at this time. Any media inquiries should be directed to my attorney. We've already reached out to Patricia Manning, but I wanted to get your personal perspective, especially regarding the family connection between you and Gordon Williams." I froze. "What family connection?" "Mr. Williams is your son's father-in-law, correct? That creates an interesting dynamic in the case. How did she know this? Who had told her?" As I said, I have no comment. Please contact my attorney. I hung up, my hand shaking slightly, and immediately called Patricia. "It's already started," she said grimly when I told her about the call. "They're trying to make this personal, to paint you as a vindictive mother-in-law, rather than a professional standing up against discrimination. Who would have leaked the family connection? Could be anyone. Williams has plenty of contacts in business media. The point is to put pressure on you, to make this uncomfortable enough that you'll back down." That evening, my phone rang again, Michael this time. "Have you seen the Business Chronicle website?" he demanded without greeting. "No, why?" "There's an article about your lawsuit. It mentions me and Rebecca by name, Mom by name. It says I'm caught between my mother's crusade and my wife's family. They quoted people at Meridian saying you were difficult to work with and resistant to new ideas." My stomach dropped. "Michael, I didn't talk to any reporters. I wouldn't do that to you." "Well, someone did. Rebecca is beside herself. Her friends are calling. Her father is furious." His voice cracked with stress. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." I pulled up the article on my laptop as we spoke, scanning it quickly. The piece was cunningly constructed, ostensibly objective reporting on an age discrimination case, but with strategic quotes and context that painted me as a disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta against my son's in-laws. It mentioned my divorce from prominent businessman Martin Reynolds, implying I had a history of conflict with successful men. "This is their strategy, Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're trying to make me back down by dragging my family into it, by hurting you. Well, it's working. I'm hurt. Rebecca is talking about postponing our plans to start a family because of the stress. Is that what you wanted?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. "Of course not. You know that's not what I want. Then why can't you just let this go? Take whatever settlement they offer and move on with your life, because this isn't just about me." My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. "This is about every woman being pushed aside, made invisible, discarded because she had the audacity to age. This is about changing a system that decides our value decreases with every passing year while men become more distinguished and experienced. So you're sacrificing your family for a principle." His voice was cold now. "For some abstract cause. No, Michael. I'm finally standing up for myself after decades of putting everyone else first, and I'm sorry that's inconvenient for you and Rebecca, but I'm not backing down." The silence that followed was deafening. When Michael spoke again, his voice was distant in a way that broke my heart. "I need some space from this, from you, until it's over." "Michael, I'm sorry, Mom, I can't do this right now." The line went dead. I sat in the sudden silence of my condo, the loss of my son's support a physical ache in my chest. This was the price. Then this was what it cost to refuse to disappear quietly. Was it worth it? The question haunted me as I stared at the cruel articles still open on my laptop, at the strangers commenting on my life, my motives, my worth. My phone rang again, Sarah this time. Mom, I just saw the article. Are you okay? I started to say yes, automatically, the response ingrained after decades of being the strong one, the one who was always fine. But what came out instead was a sob, raw and unexpected. Oh, Mom. Sarah's voice was gentle. I'm coming over. Don't argue. I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to her word, my daughter arrived at my door 23 minutes later, still in her scrubs, carrying a bottle of wine in a bag from my favorite Thai restaurant. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around me and held on tight, letting me cry in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in years. Later, after food and wine and tears, we sat on my sofa, Sarah's head resting against my shoulder like when she was small. Michael will come around, she said quietly. Once the dust settles. What if he doesn't? The fear that had been lurking beneath everything else finally surfaced. What if this costs me my relationship with my son? Sarah straightened, looking at me directly. Then that's on him, not you. You raised us to stand up for what's right, to speak truth to power. If Michael can't handle you practicing what you preached, that's his failing, not yours. It's not that simple. He's caught between loyalties. Yes, between his mother who has supported him unconditionally his entire life, and his wife, who called you old to your face at his birthday party. Sarah's voice held an edge I rarely heard. I love my brother, but he needs to grow a spine. I smiled despite myself. When did you get so fierce? I learned from the best. She squeezed my hand. This matters, Mom. What you're doing matters. Not just for you, but for me, for all women. For everyone who will someday be considered too old to have value. Her words steadied me, reminded me why I had started down this path. Thank you for being here. Always, she promised. Now, let's figure out how to respond to this hit piece. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. 2 more articles appeared in business publications, each more personal than the last. I received emails from former colleagues expressing support but also concern about being associated with my case. My social media accounts were flooded with comments from strangers, some supportive, others viciously attacking me as bitter, jealous, past my prime. I didn't hear from Michael, but Martin called, his tone carefully neutral. I thought we should talk about what's happening. Perhaps there's a way to resolve this that works for everyone. I'm listening, I said, though I was already wary. Gordon Williams is prepared to offer a very generous settlement. Substantially more than what Meridian originally proposed. In exchange, you drop all claims and sign a standard NDA. How generous are we talking? 3 years, salary, plus healthcare coverage until you're Medicare eligible. It's an excellent offer, Diane. It was substantially more than I had expected. Enough to give me financial security while I figured out my next steps. Enough to make the practical voice in my head argue strongly for acceptance. What's the catch? Martin paused. The settlement would need to be finalized quickly, before the EEOC completes its investigation. Of course. Williams wanted this buried before the government agency could substantiate the pattern of discrimination. Before it could become a precedent that might help other cases. I need to discuss this with my attorney, I said. Naturally, but Diane. His voice softened with what seemed like genuine concern. Think about what this has already cost you. Think about what continuing might cost. After we hung up, I called Patricia and relayed the offer. It's a good settlement, she acknowledged. Better than most discrimination cases, see, and it would provide immediate resolution, rather than potentially years of litigation. But the EEOC investigation is going well. Our case is strong, and getting stronger. And an NDA means you could never speak publicly about what happened, not to help other women, not to advocate for change, not to share your story in any way that might identify Meridian or Williams. So I'd get financial compensation, but I'd have to disappear. Be silent. Essentially, yes. I thought about it for 3 days. Weighing the practical benefits against the principles at stake, I thought about Michael's absence, about the stress of continued media attention, about the drain of a protracted legal battle. I thought about the financial security the settlement would provide. But I also thought about Sarah's words. This matters. What you're doing matters. I thought about the other women who had come forward with their stories. I thought about the emails I'd received from strangers thanking me for fighting this fight, for making visible what had been hidden for too long. On the 3rd day, I called Patricia. I'm declining the settlement offer. Are you sure? This isn't a decision to make lightly. I'm sure. I didn't start this for the money. I started it to make a point, and accepting their hush money would undermine that point completely. All right then. I could hear the smile in her voice. Let's prepare for the next phase. The next phase came sooner than expected. The following week, the EEO completed its investigation and found reasonable cause to believe that Meridian Pharmaceuticals had engaged in age discrimination. The agency would attempt conciliation between the parties, but if that failed, they would either sue Meridian themselves or grant us the right to sue in federal court. The news made headlines in industry publications and even some mainstream media. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, former colleagues, industry contacts. Patricia fielded most of the inquiries. But the message was consistent. We had won the first significant battle. Gordon Williams' response came within hours. Another reporter from the Business Chronicle called, this time with more targeted questions. Was it true I had been reprimanded twice for insubordination in my early years at Meridian? Had I really dated a supervisor in 2012? Was I aware that my divorce records included allegations of emotional volatility? I refused to comment, but the implications were clear. They were digging deeper, preparing to get nastier. They would try to paint me as unstable, unprofessional, untrustworthy. They would try to make this about my character rather than their actions. That evening, as I was processing the day's events, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Rebecca standing there, her perfect features set in an expression I couldn't quite read. Rebecca, I said, unable to hide my surprise. Michael isn't here. I know. I came to talk to you. Her voice was tight with controlled emotion. May I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. Rebecca had never visited my home before without Michael. She stepped past me, her gaze sweeping critically over my living room before she took a seat on the edge of my sofa, her posture rigid. I'll be direct, she said. This lawsuit is destroying my family. My father is under tremendous stress. My mother is having anxiety attacks. Michael is miserable. All because you've decided to make some grand feminist statement at our expense. I took a deep breath before responding. I understand this is difficult for everyone, but what happened to me, what your father orchestrated across multiple companies was illegal discrimination. My father was restructuring underperforming divisions. That's business. Targeting employees based on age isn't business. It's illegal, and the EEOC agrees. Rebecca's perfect composure slipped slightly, a flash of anger in her eyes. Do you have any idea what you've done? The media is calling my father an ageist. His reputation is being damaged. The board is questioning his judgment. Our family name is being dragged through the mud. I'm sorry for the personal distress this is causing, I said, meaning it. But your father made choices that affected real people's lives. My life. The lives of dozens of other experienced professionals, who were pushed aside not because of their performance but because of their age. So this is revenge. Because I made one comment about you looking like a grandmother. The accusation was so unexpected it momentarily took my breath away. What? At Michael's birthday? I said you looked more like a grandmother than a mother. And now you're punishing my entire family. I stared at her, genuinely speechless. Was that really how she saw this? As a petty act of revenge for a social slight. Rebecca, this isn't about your comment. This is about being illegally terminated from a 17-year career because someone decided I was too old to be valuable anymore. But you're enjoying this, aren't you? Her perfect eyebrows drew together. You're enjoying watching my father squirm. You're enjoying the attention, the sympathy, the chance to play the victim. There's nothing enjoyable about any of this, I said, keeping my voice level with effort. I've lost my job. I've been publicly attacked in the media. My relationship with my son is strained. I'm not doing this for fun. Rebecca studied me, her gaze calculating. What would it take for you to drop this? Excuse me. Everyone has a price. Diane, what's yours? Name it. Whatever settlement they've offered. My family can do better. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I finally understood. This wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. This was about power. Who had it? Who wanted it? Who was willing to fight for it? This isn't about money. Rebecca, then what? A job somewhere else. A public apology. Tell me what you want so we can end this nightmare. Her voice had taken on an edge of desperation beneath the polished exterior. I considered her for a long moment, this young woman who had never known what it was to be dismissed, to be rendered invisible, to have her worth questioned simply because of the passage of time. What I want isn't something you can give me, I said finally. What I want is for women to be valued for their experience and wisdom, not just their youth and appearance. What I want is for your father and men like him to face consequences for illegal discrimination. What I want is to not disappear quietly because that would be more convenient for everyone else. Rebecca's perfectly made-up face flushed with frustration. Those are just words. Meaningless political talking points. What do you actually want? Justice, I said simply. And change. She stood abruptly. You're being ridiculous and selfish. You're tearing apart your son's family for some abstract principle. No, Rebecca. Your father tore apart families when he decided that workers over a certain age weren't valuable anymore. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. She grabbed her designer purse, her movements sharp with anger. Michael was right. There's no reasoning with you. You know what's interesting? Rebecca said as she headed for the door. You never once asked if what your father did was wrong, if the discrimination actually happened. You just wanted to make it go away. She paused, her hand on the doorknob. For just a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, doubt, perhaps, or recognition cross her face. But then it was gone, replaced by the polished mask of indignation. My father built a billion-dollar company from nothing. He employs thousands of people. He gives millions to charity. He doesn't have to justify his business decisions to anyone, least of all to you. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, replaying the conversation. It had been illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. Rebecca's visit hadn't been about reconciliation or understanding, it had been about containment, about using whatever leverage she thought she had to make the problem go away. Money, emotional manipulation, appeals to family loyalty, tools that had probably worked for her in the past. But not this time, not with me, not anymore. The next day Patricia called with news. The EEOC conciliation had failed. Perennial's lawyers had refused to engage meaningfully in the process, offering only the same settlement terms they'd proposed before, with a slightly higher dollar amount. The EEOC was now deciding whether to sue Meridian directly, or grant us the right to file our own lawsuit. Either way, we're moving forward, Patricia said. But you should be prepared for things to get uglier. They'll try to discredit you any way they can. I know, I said. Rebecca came to my house last night, Gordon Williams' daughter. What did she want? To find out my price. To make this go away. Patricia was silent for a moment. That's unusual, and concerning. It suggests they're getting desperate, or that they're willing to do whatever it takes to protect Williams' reputation. Be careful, Diane. Document every interaction. Don't meet with any of them alone. I will. True to Patricia's prediction, things did get uglier. A new article appeared in a different business publication, quoting anonymous sources from Meridian, describing me as resistant to change, technologically behind, and difficult to work with. It mentioned the performance issues from early in my career, minor incidents that had been resolved over 15 years ago and implied I had been on thin ice professionally for years. More disturbingly, it referenced my divorce, suggesting that my history of personal conflicts might be influencing my perception of events at Meridian. It was character assassination thinly disguised as journalism, and it was clearly orchestrated by Perennial's PR machine. I showed the article to Patricia, who was furious, but not surprised. This is standard playbook. They're trying to reframe this as a personal issue, your issue, rather than a systemic problem. They want to isolate you, to make you seem like the unreasonable one. Is there anything we can do? Legally, not much. These statements are carefully worded as opinions or attributed to anonymous sources. But strategically, it might be time to counter their narrative. How? By letting people hear directly from you. No PR spin, no corporate filters. Just your story, in your words. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had spent a career being professional, measured, careful with my words. The thought of speaking publicly, of making myself vulnerable to further criticism, sent a spike of anxiety through me. But Patricia was right, they were defining me, and it was time I defined myself. The opportunity came a week later when a producer from a popular morning news show reached out. They were doing a segment on age discrimination in corporate America and wanted to interview me about my case. Patricia vetted the show and the producer carefully before giving me the green light. The night before the interview, I couldn't sleep. What would I wear? How should I do my hair? What if I stumbled over my words, or looked too old, or too angry, or too emotional? The familiar anxiety about appearance, about being judged, rose up with suffocating intensity. At 3:17 a.m., I gave up on sleep and sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection in the dim light. The lines around my eyes, the softening along my jawline, the gray in my hair, all the things I'd been taught to see as flaws, as failures, as evidence of my diminishing worth. I traced the contours of my face with my fingertips, feeling the texture of the skin that had housed me for 52 years. This face had smiled at the births of my children, had cried through a divorce, had concentrated through thousands of work challenges, had laughed with friends, had kissed lovers, had weathered storms both literal and figurative. This face had lived, and I was done apologizing for it. The next morning, I appeared on American Sunrise, wearing a cobalt blue blouse that brought out my eyes, my hair in its natural silver-streaked waves, minimal makeup that didn't try to hide my age but simply enhanced my features. The host, a woman in her mid-40s, greeted me warmly before the cameras rolled. Nervous, she asked quietly. Terrified, I admitted with a small laugh. She smiled. Don't be. Just tell your truth. That's all anyone can do. When the cameras started rolling, the questions were straightforward. What happened at Meridian? What evidence suggested age discrimination? What did I hope would come from the case? I answered clearly and directly, without the corporate speak I'd hidden behind for years. I talked about receiving an award for excellence 3 months before being let go. About younger employees with less experience being promoted over older ones, regardless of performance. About the pattern we'd uncovered across multiple Perennial companies. And what would you say to those who suggest that older workers simply can't keep up with technological changes or new ways of thinking? The host asked, referencing the criticism in the recent articles without directly mentioning them. I took a deep breath. I'd say that's a convenient stereotype that doesn't match reality. Experience isn't a liability. It's an asset. Innovation doesn't just come from youth, it comes from diverse perspectives, including those shaped by decades of problem solving. The narrative that old equals obsolete isn't just cruel, it's factually wrong and economically foolish. Some might say you're bitter about being let go, that this lawsuit is personal rather than principled. The host suggested, playing devil's advocate. Of course it's personal, I said, surprising myself with my candor. Discrimination is always personal to those experiencing it. I dedicated 17 years of my life to Meridian. I consistently met or exceeded all performance metrics. And I was pushed aside not because of what I did, but because of who I am, a woman over 50. So yes, it's personal. But it's also much bigger than me. It's about challenging a system that decides people have an expiration date stamped on their foreheads. The interview continued for several more minutes, touching on the broader implications of age discrimination, particularly for women. As we wrapped up, the host asked one final question. What would you say to other women facing similar situations? I looked directly into the camera, thinking of all the women watching who might be feeling what I had felt, invisible, diminished, ashamed of their aging. I would say, you are not alone. Your experience and wisdom have value, even if the world doesn't always recognize it. And you don't have to disappear quietly. You can speak up. You can fight back. You can refuse to be erased. When the segment ended, I felt drained but also oddly energized. I had spoken my truth, without filters, without apology. Whether it changed anything remained to be seen, but for the moment, that was enough. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the time I reached home, my email was flooded with messages from women and some men sharing their own stories of age discrimination, of being pushed aside, of feeling invisible. Some were heart-wrenching in their raw pain, others were inspiring in their resilience. All of them confirmed what I had begun to suspect. This was not a personal problem. This was a systemic one, affecting countless lives. Social media buzzed with clips from the interview. Hashtags like #RefuseToBeErased and #AgeDiscrimination trended briefly. Commentary ranged from supportive to viciously critical, but even the criticism suggested the interview had struck a nerve. Patricia called, sounding more animated than I'd ever heard her. This is exactly what we needed. You've changed the narrative. You're no longer just a disgruntled ex-employee. You're the face of a movement against age discrimination. I was just telling my story, I said, still somewhat dazed by the response. Sometimes that's all it takes. Now, how are you holding up? The attention can be intense. She wasn't wrong. My phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters were requesting follow-up interviews. Strangers were finding me on every social platform. Even old friends from college and previous jobs were reaching out, many with their own stories of age-related pushback. I'm okay, I told her, and was surprised to realize it was true. It feels clarifying, in a way. Like I'm finally stepping fully into my own story instead of trying to fit into someone else's. Good. Because things are about to get interesting. The EEOC just called. They've decided to file suit directly against Meridian and 2 other perennial subsidiaries for systematic age discrimination. The significance of this took a moment to sink in. The government is suing them. Yes, our case helped establish the pattern. They're treating this as a priority investigation now. What does this mean for our lawsuit? It means we have the weight of a federal agency behind us. It means this isn't just your word against theirs anymore. It means we're winning. The EEOC's decision to pursue the case directly changed everything. Suddenly, it wasn't just about me, it was about a government agency taking on systematic age discrimination in a major corporation. The press coverage shifted from personal to institutional, focusing on patterns and policies rather than individual grievances. Perennial's stock took a hit as investors reacted to the potential legal and reputation damage. Industry analysts began questioning Gordon Williams' leadership directly, some suggesting that his modernization strategy had crossed legal and ethical lines. 3 days after the EEOC announcement, my doorbell rang. It was Michael, looking tired and conflicted. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside to let him in, my heart pounding with both hope and anxiety. He hadn't been to my home in nearly 2 months. His absence a physical ache I'd tried to ignore. Michael sat heavily on my sofa, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood that my throat tightened with emotion. "Rebecca and I are separating," he said without preamble. The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through me. Michael, I'm so sorry, are you? He looked up, his expression not accusatory, but genuinely questioning. Yes, of course I am. I never wanted this to hurt your marriage. He nodded slowly. I know. That's what I finally realized. This isn't about Rebecca or me, or even her father. It's about something much bigger. He took a deep breath. The thing is, Mom, I've been watching you these past few months. Really watching, and I've seen something I never noticed before. What's that? How the world treats you differently than it treats Dad. How people dismiss you in ways they never would him. How Rebecca and her family talk about you compared to how they talk about him. He shook his head. It's like I had these blinders on, and suddenly they fell away, and I could see all these patterns I'd been missing. I sat beside him, careful to give him space. That couldn't have been easy to see. It wasn't. Especially because I was part of it. I expected you to back down, to put my comfort above your dignity. I never would have asked that of Dad. The simple truth of this observation hit me with unexpected force. He was right. The different expectations, the different standards, they pervaded every relationship, even the closest ones. What happened with Rebecca? I asked gently. A lot of things. Her reaction to all this was ... revealing. She couldn't understand why I wouldn't just tell. You two dropped the lawsuit. Why I wouldn't choose loyalty to family, meaning her family, over everything else. He sighed. But it was more than that. I started noticing how she talks about women who are older than her. The constant little digs, the dismissiveness, and I realized I didn't want that to be the example for our children someday. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I'm sorry it came to this. I'm not really. He looked up, his eyes clearer than they had been in months. Some revelations are painful but necessary. I needed to see this about Rebecca, about myself, about the world. I needed to understand what you're fighting for. We talked for hours that night, more openly than we had in years, about the lawsuit, about his marriage, about the subtle and not so subtle ways age and gender shaped our experiences of the world. For the first time, I felt like my son was seeing me as a complete person, not just in my role as his mother. As he was leaving, he turned at the door. I'm proud of you, Mom. I should have said that months ago. The words washed through me like a warm tide, healing places I hadn't realized were still raw. Thank you. That means more than you know. I'm going to do better, he promised. At seeing these things, at speaking up when I see them, at being the kind of man who doesn't need his mother to fit into some comfortable box just to make his life easier. After he left, I sat in my quiet living room, processing everything that had happened. Michael's marriage was ending, a consequence I had never intended, had actively tried to avoid. There would be pain ahead for him, complications and recriminations and difficult conversations. But amid the wreckage, something valuable had emerged, a clearer vision, a stronger relationship between us, a son who had begun to understand what his mother had been fighting for all along. The next morning, an email arrived from Gordon Williams' office, requesting a private meeting. To discuss resolution of pending matters, I forwarded it to Patricia, who called immediately. This is interesting timing, she said. The EEOC involvement has them rattled. Williams must be feeling the heat from his board. Should I meet with him? Not alone, certainly. But yes, I think we should hear what he has to say. I'll be there with you. And we should insist on neutral territory, not his office, not mine. 2 days later, I sat across from Gordon Williams in a conference room at a downtown hotel, Patricia at my side, Williams' attorney at his. Williams himself was not what I had expected. From Rebecca's descriptions and industry reputation, I had imagined someone physically imposing, intimidatingly charismatic. The man before me was smaller, older than I had envisioned, perhaps in his mid-60s, with a trimmed white beard and expensive glasses that magnified rather than concealed the lines around his eyes. Ms. Reynolds, he began, his voice measured and controlled. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I think it's time we discussed this situation directly. I appreciate your willingness to talk, Mr. Williams, I replied, matching his formal tone. What did you want to discuss? Williams exchanged a glance with his attorney, who nodded slightly. I want to propose a resolution that acknowledges your concerns while allowing all parties to move forward productively. Patricia leaned forward slightly. We're listening. Williams cleared his throat. Perennial Healthcare is prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement that includes not just financial compensation, but also structural changes to our hiring and retention policies. Specifically, we would establish a committee to review all terminations and restructurings to ensure age is not a factor. We would implement training on age discrimination across all subsidiaries, and we would create a position specifically focused on ensuring age diversity in our workforce. I glanced at Patricia, whose neutral expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. And the financial terms, she asked. Williams' attorney slid a document across the table. Full details are here, but in summary, 3 years' salary, health care until Medicare eligibility, and restoration of all pension contributions as if Ms. Reynolds had remained employed until retirement age. Patricia took the document but didn't open it immediately, and in exchange, standard confidentiality regarding the financial terms, the attorney said smoothly. But, and this is key, no restrictions on Ms. Reynolds discussing the policy changes or the broader issues of age discrimination. In fact, we would welcome her input as a consultant in developing our new diversity initiatives. This was unexpected, a settlement that would allow me to continue speaking out about the very issues that had brought us here. I studied Gordon Williams' face, trying to read what lay behind this surprising offer. Why now? I asked directly. What's changed since your previous offers? Williams met my gaze steadily. Several things. The EEOC involvement, certainly. The board's concerns about potential legal liability. But also, double quotes. He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. Your television interview was compelling. It made me consider some aspects of our restructuring that I perhaps hadn't fully examined before. I wasn't sure I believed him, but it didn't really matter. What mattered was the offer on the table, one that acknowledged the systemic nature of the problem and proposed concrete steps to address it. We'll need time to review the details, Patricia said. Of course. Williams stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Take whatever time you need, but I hope we can resolve this soon, for everyone's benefit. As he reached the door, I called after him. Mr. Williams. He turned, one eyebrow raised inquiringly. I'm curious, have you spoken with your daughter about any of this? A shadow passed over his face. Rebecca has strong opinions about many things, including this situation, and you disagree with her opinions. He seemed to weigh his response carefully. Let's just say that parenthood offers many opportunities to recognize that our children might not always share our evolving perspectives. With that cryptic statement, he nodded and left. Well, Patricia said once we were alone. That was not at all what I expected. Me neither. I was still processing William's last comment. Do you think he's sincere about the policy changes? It doesn't matter if he's sincere. What matters is that they'll be legally binding. She tapped the settlement document thoughtfully. This is a good offer, Diane, better than most clients in your situation ever see. The financial terms are generous, and the policy commitments have real teeth, but nothing, actually. I think we should take it. She gave me a shrewd look. Unless there's something else you were hoping to achieve. I considered the question carefully. What had I wanted from this fight? Justice, yes. Accountability, certainly. But also something less tangible, recognition. Not just for me, but for every woman who had been pushed aside, rendered invisible, told her value decreased with each passing year. Will the policy changes be public? I asked. We can negotiate that point specifically. Make it part of the agreement that Perennial issues a public statement about their new initiatives. Then I think this could work. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Satisfaction, relief, but also a wistfulness I hadn't expected. The fight had defined me for months now. Ending it would mean figuring out what came next. The settlement negotiations took another 2 weeks to finalize. The financial terms remained as initially offered. The policy changes were expanded to include all perennial subsidiaries and would be publicly announced as part of the company's new commitment to age diversity and inclusion. Most significantly, I would be hired as a consultant for the first year of implementation, working directly with human resources to develop training and establish metrics for measuring progress. My experiences, the very things that had made me obsolete in their eyes months earlier, were now being valued as expertise. On the day the settlement was finalized, I sat in Patricia's office, staring at the signature page with a sense of unreality. "Is it really over?" "This phase is over," she said, organizing the documents efficiently. "But I suspect your work on these issues is just beginning." She was right. The day after Perennial announced its new age diversity initiative, with no mention of the lawsuit or settlement that had forced their hand, my phone and email were flooded with messages. Other companies wanting to proactively address age discrimination issues, women's professional organizations requesting speaking engagements, media outlets seeking interviews about the groundbreaking policy changes at Perennial. 4 months after signing the settlement, I stood at a podium at the Women in Leadership Conference, looking out at an audience that included executives, activists, politicians, and hundreds of professional women across all age ranges. My presentation was titled "Refusing to be Erased: Age Discrimination and Women's Professional Lives." As I shared my story, the humiliation, the fight, the unexpected victories, I watched the faces in the audience. The younger women listened with a mixture of concern and determination, perhaps seeing for the first time the battles that might lie ahead for them. The older women nodded in recognition, many with tears in their eyes, seeing their own experiences reflected in my words. In the front row sat Sarah, beaming with pride. Beside her, to my surprise, was Michael. He had called the previous evening to ask if he could attend, wanting to really hear and understand what I was fighting for. Our relationship was healing, slowly but steadily, as he processed both his divorce and his changing understanding of the world his mother navigated. The fight against age discrimination isn't just about legal protections or corporate policies, I told the audience as I concluded. It's about challenging the cultural narrative that says women have an expiration date. It's about refusing to become invisible. It's about recognizing that our worth is not diminished by our age. It is enhanced by our experience, our wisdom, our resilience. The applause was thunderous. As I stepped away from the podium, a woman approached me, perhaps in her late 60s, with an elegant white bob and vibrant red lipstick. She took my hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "I've been feeling invisible for years. After hearing you speak, I'm ready to be seen again." Her words stayed with me long after the conference ended. Ready to be seen again. That was what this had all been about. Really, not just for me, but for all of us. Not demanding special treatment or clinging to positions we hadn't earned, but simply refusing to be erased because of a number, because of a cultural narrative that said our time had passed. That evening, Sarah, Michael and I had dinner at my favorite restaurant, celebrating what Sarah dramatically called my triumphant emergence as an age discrimination warrior. We laughed and talked with an ease I hadn't felt with my children in years, the old protective barriers finally coming down. As we waited for dessert, Michael asked unexpectedly, "Do you ever regret it?" Standing up to them, I mean, given everything it cost, I considered the question seriously. The fight had indeed taken its toll, financially, emotionally, relationally. For months, my life had been consumed by legal strategies and media scrutiny and painful confrontations. "No," I said finally, "I don't regret it. What I regret is that it took me so long to recognize what was happening. That I spent so many years internalizing the message that my aging was something shameful, something to apologize for or hide." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I catch myself doing that sometimes, apologizing for taking up space, for having opinions, for simply existing in the world as a woman. And I'm only 26. It starts early, I agreed. And it gets worse as you get older. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's what I've learned through all of this. What's next for you? Michael asked. After the perennial consulting contract ends, I smiled, feeling a sense of possibility that had been absent for too long. I'm starting my own consulting firm, specializing in age diversity and inclusion. Several companies have already reached out. Turns out, my experience is valuable after all. Age Wisdom Consulting, Sarah suggested with a grin. Your slogan can be gray hair. Don't care. We laughed, the sound warming me from within. My life had been appended, rearranged, transformed in ways I never could have anticipated when Rebecca uttered those careless words at Michael's birthday party. You look more like a grandmother than a mother. Words that had once cut like glass now seemed almost laughably insignificant. Yes, I looked like a 52-year-old woman because that's exactly what I was. A woman with lines that told my story, with gray that marked my journey, with a voice that had finally found its fullest expression. A woman who had refused to be erased.